because they have too much power. The people in charge have obvious problematic agendas. And they basically, at least in the US, they own the government. They ended up marrying or dating powerful people sort of in his circle. So allegedly Trump is one of these guys, right?
Whitney Webb digs into how the US government gets influenced by big names like Donald Trump, who she thinks both shook things up and played along with the big guys, and Elon Musk, whose tech empire and bold moves seem to shape government policy and power dynamics in a big way.
You know, I would argue that in the American psyche, there is a deeply ingrained, I don't even know what to call it, like psychological habit, maybe, of looking for a personal savior. If we just vote this guy in for president, he's going to fix everything. You know, I'm all in for Bernie. I'm all in for Trump. They're going to drain the swamp. They're going to end corruption, blah, blah, blah. As long as we get this one guy in at the top, it'll all be fine. Or as long as this one guy, we all back this one guy, he's going to fix everything. No, that is a pipe dream. And we've been conditioned to believe that, and I think, if you consider all of the money that, just think about how much money the CIA has pumped into crazy psychological experiments. So much money over the past 100 years or so has gone into investigating and developing ways to control how you think and manipulate how you behave and how you think and perceive things. It's very, and social media is a major battleground for that. I mean, you don't really know if a lot of the accounts that respond to you are real or not, or are authentic people, or they're bots. And now a lot of people are interacting with this chat GPT, which is OpenAI, I believe, co-founded by Elon Musk. And, a lot of people are like, oh, this is going to revolutionize this and that and change this, but it's going to manipulate how a lot of people think, because they're going to be interacting with this inorganic entity that's been trained on a very specific set of data and has very specific political views, which some people are talking about. And it's going to persuade people to believe things, or alter how people receive reality. And you had this situation a few months ago where there were claims that the Google Lambda, their, I guess, chat GPT equivalent at Google, was sentient. And that turned out to be total bullcrap, because the guy later admitted that the transcript that was proof of sentience, he had heavily edited and wouldn't say how he'd edited it. And, it's complicated. And we're not at a situation where there's actually organic artificial intelligence where it's creating stuff on its own.
I reckon there's a psychological habit of looking for a personal savior or standout figure who seems capable of fixing everything.
It's very good at imitating people because it's been trained on so many instances because of the internet and smartphones and all of that, of human speech. The internet's full of that stuff. Obviously, there is some truth to the fact that it does make certain things more convenient. It does technically free up certain people's jobs so they can have more time to do other stuff. Yeah. The problem is literally the worst people in the world are in charge of it. And they want to use it to make everyone basically a complete idiot that's super easily manipulated and controllable. And that is what needs to be resisted. So, if someone wants to make an open source AI that, I don't know, does some stuff, I mean, I'm not going to be like, no, don't do that. But, I think it's very important now more than ever to divest as much as possible from big tech, Google and Oracle and, all these other companies, Amazon, what have you, because they have too much power. The people in charge have obvious problematic agendas. And they basically, at least in the US, they own the government. I mean, they basically control the government. The tech billionaires fund almost all the politicians. They have access to all of the data of the military and intelligence agencies. And frankly, the Silicon Valley companies and the national security state in the US have fused 100%. They are the same blob. You can't tell where one ends and one begins anymore. That's highly problematic. That's fascism, right? When corporations and government fuse. So yeah, Silicon Valley fascism has arrived, at least in the United States. I think a lot of people just haven't realized it yet. So those companies we cannot feed, and they feed off of our data. They've been saying for years, data is the new oil. So instead of the oil barons of the early 20th century, these are the data barons of now.
It's especially adept at imitating people because it has been trained on a vast number of examples from various sources.
We need to divest from them if we do not want them to have extreme entrenched power, because a lot of these guys are transhumanists with the view that humans must merge with machine, not that the humans that want to merge with machine can, right? And a lot of this stuff becomes like highly problematic after a while, including a lot of their visions for how human society needs to be organized. You know, they're very clearly, the majority of them, not interested in democracy at all. They're interested in some sort of technocracy or some sort of authoritarian, very controlled environment. So people need to keep in mind that a large amount of alternative media gets money from what I refer to as Thielverse, meaning Peter Thiel, right? But really more broadly, it's the PayPal mafia, as it's been called, people affiliated with PayPal to various degrees, which of course includes Elon Musk. They have a lot of influence over alternative media and even over content platforms like Rumble. And have been funding quote unquote libertarian movements and all of this stuff, but I don't really see them as being libertarian at all. Elon Musk you have to look at the actions of Musk and then what he says. And not enough people do that, whether it's for Musk or really anyone. You have to look at people's actions, not just what they say, because someone can say all the right things and then, be totally you behind your back. And if you're just going to take what they're telling you and the excuses and whatever, I mean, you'll never figure out what's actually going on. And I think that's fair for Elon Musk as well. Did he buy Twitter to save free speech, or did he buy Twitter to have a massive data to train AI on and to train all other sorts of products he has on? Or did he make it like he's openly admitted, did he buy it so he can turn Twitter, now X, into X the everything app that doesn't just become, isn't just social media. It becomes half of the financial system and becomes American WeChat, which of course WeChat in China is the everything app means you have all the data.
If we want to stop them from gaining excessive, entrenched power, we need to divest from them.
Basically, if people use it for everything, it accumulates more data than everything else, and it has all the control. The control. So, people are naive here, I think, because, I mean, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, but is he the richest man in the world just because of his own entrepreneurial whatever? Or is it because his companies were held up by government subsidies that allowed him to become rich, and he's the richest man in the world because he worked with the state? His company, SpaceX, is currently a contractor to both the military and intelligence communities. Yeah. Its success is contingent on those contracts, SpaceX. And his entire trajectory up to this point has been contingent on government subsidies or things of that nature. That's a problem. And then people years ago start affiliating Elon Musk with this brilliant scientist who's going to save us all. And how far have things progressed since then? You know what I mean? And remember, Elon Musk, too, is making a brain chip. That's like not half, but a significant amount of the monkeys it was tested on. And now they've gone to human trials, or starting human trials. If I was an altruistic guy that just wanted to make a brain chip, sorry, it just sounds insane to even say that. But anyway, I wanted to make this thing, this product that goes in people's bodies, and half of the animals, or like a third or whatever. I would go back to the drawing board and find a way to make it so it doesn't that many animals before human trials.
If we start killing humans with that, it's not going to go well.
No. It's weird. And then you have the fact that he said stuff like X as meaning Twitter, as humanity's collective consciousness and all this. He's involved in the generative AI stuff too. He helped create OpenAI. He has his own now, which is allegedly more far left than OpenAI's ChatGPT is, even though he's positioned as being the opposite. I mean, there's a lot of contradictions there. So again, I would encourage people to look at people's actions.
If people rely on it for everything, it collects more data than anything else and ends up having all the control.
And, Musk is a businessman, and a businessman tied to the national security state at that. I mean, these are not the kind of people that you should just trust naively and blindly. And you should scrutinize their actions and not just pay attention to the nice things they say, or, oh, he said the F word on New York Times deal book and gave those advertisers the middle finger. There's a lot of stuff he is doing that is not good. And people, need to be wary of this whole issue, push to turn Twitter or X into a key part of the financial system that you'll use to pay for everything. Well, I think some of these, I see Elon Musk as a person who has like a very specific persona he wants to project to the public. And then there's business Musk, right? And I don't think they're necessarily always the same person. So, for example, Elon Musk, a lot of people maybe forget, he's a big military contractor. And also, the Space Force, that's also an intelligence agency. So he's technically a military and intelligence contractor. In order to keep your contracting business with those things, there's certain rules you have to play by, and certain things, I would assume, you can and can't say, or you'll lose those lucrative contracts. And if you look at someone like Elon Musk and his business history, a lot of his companies would not have been successful, would not have been successful without significant subsidies from the government. So, I feel like in order to get those deals, there's certain rules you have to abide by to an extent, at least when it comes to your business decisions and certain things, right? So maybe he wants to project, this persona of like, I'm one of the bros, I'm one of the guys, I believe in free speech and all of this. And certainly when he bought Twitter, that's what he said. But then it became, oh yeah, free speech, but not freedom of reach. And now it's sort of changing again with the appointment of this new CEO. And again, I don't really have any high hopes, and I didn't necessarily when Musk bought Twitter, just because I tend to be kind of skeptical, and I guess you could probably say cynical about these types of people.
Musk is a businessman, and he's also tied to the national security state, which adds another layer of complexity to his influence and activities.
And, I personally, just from my own, experience with Epstein research, I have found Musk not to be very upfront about some of those connections there. So, for example, he'll be like, a lot of people like to bring up the picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell from 2014. He'll say he was photobombed and all of this. But, he won't bring up the fact, well, at least reporters seem to have forgotten that Kimball Musk, his brother, who's on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, was introduced to a member of Epstein's entourage who had dated Epstein and lived at the apartments on 301 66th Street East, where all these girls lived. A girl from there starts dating Kimball Musk, and somehow Epstein is allegedly granted access to SpaceX facilities and tours, and then is allegedly advising Tesla, according to the New York Times reporter James Stewart, who was told by someone else that Epstein was advising Tesla, and then goes before Epstein's 2019 arrest and most of his public infamy, goes and asks him about if the rumors were true. And Epstein says yes. And this is during a time when Musk is saying he's trying to secure capital to take Tesla private, I believe. And this was allegedly involving one of the Saudi wealth funds of the Saudi government. And at that time, Epstein was a very, very close advisor to Mohammed bin Salman, who had recently come to power. So basically, what I note in my book is that there's this operation of Epstein everyone knows about, but there seems to have been another parallel operation that he used for influence ops, I guess you could say, involving women, but they were of age. They were women that were well educated in some cases, and probably most of the cases, but at least a few cases we know about, Epstein financed their graduate education and helped connect them. They ended up marrying or dating powerful people sort of in his circle. So allegedly Trump is one of these guys, right? So his girlfriend before Melania, Selena Middlefart, Epstein was taking her
Terrible
with him.
name.
Yeah.
Horrible.
I know.
Horrible name.
Well, she's Norwegian.
Spell that.
She's Norwegian. She's a Norwegian heiress.
That's
Very
tragic.
attractive despite the last name, I guess. Yeah, so that probably helped her
Good
out.
for her.
From Whitney Webb's own experience with Epstein research, it appears Musk isn't very transparent about some of his connections and associations.
Yeah. But, she and a couple of these other women that Epstein was taking to the Clinton White House in the 90s ended up marrying very powerful people. And she dated Trump, and then allegedly Melania was introduced to Trump by Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow.
They claimed that.
Who claims that?
I think it was either Ghislaine or Jeffrey Epstein at some point before their infamy.
They're saying
but
that's how Trump met Melania.
There's that allegation that they were introduced to each other, but the modeling industry thing with Epstein and Ghislaine, remember, this is before they were infamous necessarily, at least publicly. And Trump likes models. I think we all know that.
That's
right?
not breaking news.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not like it was, oh, look, meet Melania, who's underage at the time. Right. It wasn't like that. So again, if you're trying to secure influence with powerful people and you don't think they're susceptible to your blackmail op involving minors, you can be the matchmaker that sets them on the path to marital bliss, right? Because, whoever sets you up with your husband or wife, you might keep contact with for a long time, or if they come to ask for a favor, you might be willing to do so, right? So there's a few other cases where this happened. And one of these women is Melanie Walker, that we can talk about later because she's part of the Bill Gates Epstein connection.
This Junkerman lady, I'm curious.
Yeah, so Nicole Junkerman appears to be another one of these women.
So she's not an Instagram model?
No, but she was a model. She's a former model, and now she is married to some Italian oil billionaire.
Right.
Very, very wealthy. He's much older than her, I think.
I saw that.
Yeah.
He's 63 or something like that, 66.
And she's very attractive, right?
Ferdinando Bracetti Peretti.
Allegedly, there was this meeting in September 2002 in the United Kingdom at a home that is owned by Wexner, and Nicole Junkerman was on Epstein's arm with an unknown brunette woman and was passed off to these 2 U.S. senators that were there. And the allegation, the implication there, which this is right before the Iraq vote, right? The allegation is that there may have been some sort of occurring there. But why is Nicole Junkerman hanging out with Epstein and these senators at this place? It's a bit weird.
She and a few other women who were connected to Epstein and had ties to the Clinton White House ended up marrying powerful individuals.
And then there's some other business connections over the years. So, for example, Carbine 911, which is this sort of emergency 911 call center app or something like that, that's being sold all over the United States. It was created mainly by veterans of Unit 8200, which is an signal intelligence agency. It was chaired, and one of their main investors was Ehud Barak, who, of course, we know by now was very close to Epstein. And Barak urged Epstein to invest, at least of what we know, at least $1 million into that company. And apparently Leslie Wexner also invested a lot of money. And at that same time, of course, Ehud Barak was getting a bunch of money from the Wexner Foundation. There was some weird stuff going on there. But one of the directors at the time when Ehud Barak was on the board, and Pinchas Bucharest, who's former commander of Unit 8200, and some of these other guys on this network, Nicole Junkerman's on the board of directors as well. And now she's invested in SpaceX. The people behind these very big tech, the biggest of the big tech companies, are also the main donors to the 2 U.S. political parties, right? You have Peter Thiel on the Republican side, you have Reid Hoffman on the Democrat side, and Eric Schmidt on the Democrat side. I mean, they fund our politicians and they dominate our private sector infrastructure, especially as we've been forced to be more online, specifically since the era. And the goal is to have things digitalize even further and have it all be on these people's systems and have us become completely dependent on their infrastructure. And these people are in bed with intelligence. And even aside from the intelligence connections, they have a lot of dirty laundry. Why did Jeffrey Epstein have connections with almost every big tech oligarch in the United States? I mean, not enough people have bothered to ask that question. Why were so many of them subpoenaed during the JP Morgan Epstein case in the US Virgin Islands that ended up being settled? I forget how much JP Morgan paid to make it all go away, but a lot of money.
It's important to recognize that there was a deliberate effort to limit and control the discussion surrounding Epstein.
Well, it's important to understand that there was an explicit effort to limit the discussion about Epstein, to make it just about the so you don't look at anything else, right?
And he specifically was managing money for the Bronfmans during the insider trading. That was why he came down.
Well, it was
correct?
suspected because Bear Stearns had the Bronfmans as a tax client, and Epstein left Bear Stearns because of, allegedly, because he was the SEC was investigating an insider trading scandal involving the Bronfmans' owned company, Seagram's. And the SEC was tipped off that Epstein had information about that, and they went to question him at Bear Stearns, and then he was let go. And there's a lot of, he gave different reasons as to why he was let go, and so did the bank. But there's, a significant body of reporting supporting that it was related to that insider trading scandal, which also involved people from Drexel Burnham Lambert and the junk bonds. And you see a lot of Drexel people swimming around Epstein afterwards, like Leon Black, for example, who led their mergers and acquisitions department and were involved in, all sorts of financial.
Leon Black's the name that it seems to be one of the most prominent names that has come out of his Black Book. And there's suspicions about some significant loan that he gave or amount of money he gave to Epstein to manage, I seem to remember.
Yeah, I forget the exact figure, but it's astronomically high. And also Epstein was managing his family foundation. And Epstein also, was a trustee on the Wexner Foundation and involved in all sorts of philanthropic efforts. And in that same period of time, he's visiting the White House regularly. And he's going on official Microsoft business trips with Microsoft's chief technology officer. And then later in 2001 tells the UK's Evening Standard that he made all of his money because of ties to Donald Trump, Leslie Wexner, and Bill Gates. And people act like Bill Gates and Epstein didn't meet until 2011 when he was no longer affiliated with Microsoft. There's been a huge cover up of all of these other connections of Epstein there. I feel like my whole purpose as it relates to Epstein research is to make people aware of that because, I would argue that the reason Epstein went to prison and all of that stuff happened is because there was a major factional issue within this group, and there were particular interests that wanted Epstein out, and they wanted, to demonize him and make him look very bad, but they didn't want enough to come out that it would implicate stuff they were also involved in or had previously been involved in. Bitcoin's supposed to be ideal money, right? And a tool of financial freedom. And if we let the people that have run this insane monetary casino for decades use Bitcoin for their ends, Bitcoin will cease to be that.
She challenges mainstream narratives around investment and economic growth, urging a more critical examination of who truly benefits from these systems.
Are you going to fight to keep Bitcoin a tool for financial freedom for everybody and to keep it being ideal money to as a hedge against central bank and commercial bank malfeasance? Or are you going to let those same central and commercial banks use it for their ends and incorporate it into their system of complete financial control?
Whitney Webb asserts that money, far from being a neutral medium of exchange, is a tool used by those in power to maintain and expand their influence.
The US is going to get the same surveillable, programmable digital currency garbage that is being pushed in other countries, but is going to be, in those cases, is directly issued by the central bank. The US is going to get that same thing, but it's not going to be issued directly by the Fed. It's going to be issued by the commercial banks, the big banks, the too big to fail banks.
Webb explores how financial systems are designed to serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful, often at the expense of the general population.
This push for a regulated internet and the end of online anonymity and all of that is directly related to the fact that it's a mathematical inevitability that our debt-based monetary system will collapse at some point, and that the banking system, particularly Wall Street, and its global equivalents have engaged in an unprecedented degree of malfeasance and corruption and insane financial gambling activities. And just like 2008, right? That's going to explode at some point. But in 2008, people knew it was the banks and they were mad at the banks, weren't they? Bankers and organized crime, a lot of them are interested in, wealth and ultimately rackets. So if you think of organized crime sort of as its own entity and sort of take away all the associations we have with it because of Hollywood and all of these other narratives, essentially what it exists to do is expand the rackets that are lucrative and perpetuate them infinitely. Because if the racket is discovered or the organized crime syndicate is broken up, the flow of money stops. And so a lot of these lucrative rackets is later, intelligence later became very involved in them. These include things like arms trafficking and drug trafficking. These used to be the rackets of the mob, but by teaming up with intelligence, they were able to expand them and dominate them. And as a result, a lot of the Wall Street banks have become sort of dependent on money laundering. The income they make from money laundering from all of these like illegal rackets has become, really critical to their operations. And people like Catherine Austin Fitts have argued that if, the drug trade were actually to be stopped in any meaningful way, we'd see a collapse of some of the biggest banks in the world. Which is why you have, banks like HSBC, for example, getting caught money laundering for some of the biggest and most criminal Mexican drug cartels. And then people like Mark Carney stepping in to try and smooth things over. Of course, he's a former governor of the Bank of England and Bank of Canada and is slated to follow Justin Trudeau, allegedly, as, head of the left-leaning Canadian political sphere. I would say, just look at how Larry Fink has been behaving over the past 2-ish years. He was known as a big ESG guy, right? And then he openly abandoned the ESG terminology and straight up said that climate finance, green finance, all of that stuff he's involved in is about profits, not about wokeness or saving the planet or whatever. And since then has also 180'd his stance on Bitcoin and has essentially changed a lot of his talking points, which I think is very notable because, Larry Fink, among other things, is on the board of trustees of the World Economic Forum. And I think the World Economic Forum is misunderstood by a lot of people, and people use certain terms to refer to what they are and what they do. But ultimately what that group is about advancing the public-private partnership model. And of course, there's two sides to that, much like there is in the prevailing left-right paradigm of most countries' politics. And for a long time, they've leaned sort of on the public side and used talking points that are meant to appeal to the political left, and have gotten a lot of pushback as a result. And so, if you notice, people like Fink, but other people as well, have moved their rhetoric away from those seeking to appeal to the political left in the public side of the public-private partnership, leaning into the private aspect of the public-private partnership and having more right-leaning talking points. But ultimately, all are trying to lead you to the same exact system of digital ID, programmable, surveillable money, and global carbon markets. And I think, the carbon market in particular, it's sort of hard to extricate that from the climate change, situation. But I think it looks like, people like Fink and some of the people in that particular space are going to attempt to market it as something that can make people very wealthy or allow them to get quick access to capital by tokenizing their land holdings and fractionalizing their private property, using different things that haven't been able to be financialized before, and then bringing that on chain and using that as collateral, receiving loans that way and all of that. There's a lot of ambitious plans in that particular space. And aside from that, there's been this push led by the Rockefeller Foundation and some other groups through this whole push for natural asset corporations, where they basically openly talk about the idea to expand the amount of assets in the existing financial system by 5 or 6 fold by incorporating what they refer to as natural assets. So this is sort of like the financializing of the natural world and turning, allowing people to sell ecosystem services and all of that. And, this is part of the broader effort to usher in a global carbon market. So anyway, I think it's interesting that there's a lot of this shift going on. I think it's a big part of why someone like Javier Milei was given the main stage at WEF and then openly praised by the WEF that he was the WEF elites that he was supposedly scolding in that speech. They very much embraced, Milei's vision, and we're like, yeah, we should have the private sector lead the public-private partnerships and all of that. But ultimately, the public and the private, as represented within the WEF, agree about the plan. Maybe there's, how it's implemented or how it's sold to people. There's differences there, but ultimately they agree about where we're going in terms of digital ID, a global ledger and all of this stuff, programmable, surveillable money, whether it's private sector issued or central bank issued, ultimately the end results are somewhat the same, but there's an effort to sort of change the sales pitch for all of that. And you can see it in Fink and you can see it in other people. I think it's become increasingly similar with time. And ultimately, a lot of these people have that function like mob families or have documented ties to organized crime. For example, I've done a lot of work on the Jeffrey Epstein case, and his main patron is an American billionaire named Leslie Wexner, who has documented ties to organized crime to the extent that, he's from Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus, Ohio police had put out a report on his ties to organized crime, and it was shut down by the Columbus police chief, who had ties to Wexner and was providing police officers to Wexner's home, like for security and a lot of other corruption there, and essentially covered it up. And those ties came up because his tax lawyer was murdered in broad daylight, shot in the face, and what is considered still an unsolved mystery, even though they did solve it and tied it to Wexner, but they buried their report. And the lawyer was murdered the day before he was going to testify to the IRS about tax evasion, about unspecified things, but he was the lawyer for Wexner's business interests at the Limited. So a lot of these people have spent an insane amount of money rebranding themselves as philanthropists. So I think one figure that was sort of exposed as doing that during the COVID era, of course, is someone like Bill Gates, right? Who has spent a lot of money framing himself as altruistic and as a philanthropist. But a lot of these guys do that. And in reality, this is something from the playbook that was taken from J.D. Rockefeller, the United States' first billionaire, who was very much hated for what he was doing to the country, back in the early 20th century, and tried to rebrand himself as a philanthropist, and did so with the help of people like Edward Bernays, who is considered the father both of propaganda and public relations, which I guess you could argue public relations is essentially propaganda for the corporate sector. But there's been a lot of manipulations on the public in trying to change our perception of who these people are and what they do. But consistently, these particular networks, a lot of whom are connected to organized crime, have been engaging crisis after crisis that the world has experienced in massive wealth transfers for us to them. And COVID's a great example of that. Where, so many people that seem to have apparent foreknowledge that something drastic was coming were able to benefit so hugely economically, while the rest of us obviously have been left in a very different situation. And it's true if you look at the 2008 financial crisis or any number of other financial crises, that have happened in the past 100 years. You have pretty consistent wealth transfer to the point where like the 0.1% of the world have such an insane amount of wealth and power at this point. And we're still being so manipulated by them to the point where, at least in the United States right now, people are clamoring for competing squads of billionaires to save the country. So, you might have Donald Trump and Elon Musk on one side, and then all the Democratic Party donors, many of whom are from Silicon Valley, like Eric Schmidt and Pierre Omidyar, and a lot of these other big names, these oligarch figures, which billionaire faction is going to save us all. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they've been stealing our wealth and convincing us to give away our freedoms in exchange for what they promise is security. But we don't get security. We just get less and less freedom. And we're essentially being herded into what I would argue is sort of a technocratic nightmare, the cornerstone of which is this digital ID agenda, which is meant to be linked to some sort of digital wallet that contains programmable, surveillable money, either a CBDC issued by a central bank or issued by a private bank. And I think ultimately what people need to do is not focus so much on these political saviors being put out in front of us, but focus on what we're going to do to not comply with the digital ID agenda and these other things that they need in order to push us into this world that they've been building. How do you find a way to blame somebody else for the financial system imploding? And when you bring the financial system back, what do these people, people like Jamie Dimon and all these top bankers, like what is their ideal scenario for like money and how people interact with and use money? Well, being able to grift as much as you want and take as much as you want from the people under you without them knowing or complaining, because that's what they've been doing for decades, right? Wall Street. So they want to keep doing that. They don't want to change their behavior. So they want to find a way to be able to steal from the underclass as much as possible without the underclass complaining or revolting, and control how they spend their money, and control their financial and other behavior so that they can maintain their place on the top. So what we're having is the engineering of a neo-feudal society where you have the small upper class and then a massive underclass that the upper class can manipulate and control and, do whatever they want with as they see fit. And so that's what I think the ambition of a lot of these various initiatives we're seeing for unprecedented control and surveillance are aimed at. And the goal is to use technology, whether it's AI or any of these other emerging technologies, to be able to do that, because obviously there's so much more of us than there are of them. And so in order to scale what they want to scale, to be able to deal with the huge difference in size between their class and our class, they feel like, they need these emerging technologies. They need AI. I think they're very arrogant. I think they think that they are very confident in their abilities to manipulate people, which they certainly absolutely can. And they can manipulate people very effectively. But ultimately, I think, a lot of their arrogance is their downfall. But it's up to us, once again, to show that they're wrong and show that we're not powerless, that we're not completely dumbed down and egocentric and just focused on hedonistic pursuits, and that we actually care about the state of the world, the future for our children. We're going to say no to these Orwellian systems that are being rolled out globally. I mean, digital ID is something that is being pushed through so fast. The EU is adopting it now for entry-exit stuff. The UK is going to roll it out next year. The US is pushing for it as the only solution to migration and to voter fraud. And Donald Trump is essentially now a shoo-in, and he's been promoting all of these things on the campaign trail. Where I live in Chile is rolling out digital ID, right after Christmas this year. And it's voluntary for now, but all of these things are going to be voluntary at first, and then they'll try and make it so it's, involuntary, essentially. You don't have a smartphone, you don't have the ID, well, you can't come in here. And I think people, again, need to prepare for ultimately what to do about that, and to sort of, maybe it's inconvenient to not have constant access to these platforms and these things at your fingertips, but there's other things, there's alternatives we can build, and we have time to do that now. And I think that's where a lot of the focus should be, and not so much on the circus. But again, I think people too, what's unfortunate now, particularly in like election season, a lot of people that know that it's a uniparty, whether in the UK or, the United States, that know that, like, in the UK, the Tories and Labour agree on so much more than they don't when they're actually in power, illegal migration just being one example. And then when you look at the US and the Republicans and the Democrats, pro-surveillance, pro-war, pro any other number of things, pro-Israel, pro-oligarch, essentially, at the end of the day, and nothing really ever gets solved. The problems continue. And maybe, the argument ends up being, well, if we elect this guy, the march towards this tyranny will be slightly slower than if the other guy gets in. I mean, is that really the best we can do? And at this point, people that were aware of the uniparty getting sucked into this tribalist mindset of, I support this guy instead of this guy, and all of that. I mean, I think we need to step back and realize that voting for the lesser of two evils every 4 years is going to we're going to end up in the exact same place as if we just sat back and did literally nothing. And I don't really think that this is the only solution that people should pursue. I mean, I think it's honestly insanity, especially considering what we saw with COVID, where essentially every country in the world adopted the same policies, and it made no sense to do so. And now the people that criticized that at the time, despite all of the backlash and all of the name calling, have been proven right. And now, if you're criticizing both of the candidates in the U.S. presidential race, as I am, I'm getting called accused of rooting for the other guy, or having Trump derangement syndrome, or being a Trumper also, which I was also called during COVID, even though I was very critical of Trump's first term. And it's just this tribalist madness. People really need to snap out of it. They're so good at manipulating us and dividing and conquering us, and we need to realize that this is an issue of us versus them, the them being the 0.1% of this global oligarchy that is taking control of both the public and the private sector, and have essentially created what my colleague Ian Davis calls the global public-private partnership. We need to stop trusting these people that are being pushed to us and we're being told are our saviors and altruists and all of this, look at their connections and follow the money, and you will find that is not what these people are, and that is not what these people want. And unfortunately, as far as the transhumanist agenda goes, I mean, that's an effort, I would argue that's because a lot of the people pushing that have really no spirituality at all and are, as far as the spectrum on material and spiritual, as far to the material side as you can get. And they think they can become gods if they advance this technology enough. But they also, again, have this mentality that they will be gods and the rest of us will be serfs. And it will be the class difference won't be enforced by economics like it once was maybe in the medieval era. It will be enforced by the technology that they've designed to control and that they're making us dependent on. And the more dependent we become on it, and the less we do, and the more we're enslaved by the convenience of it and all of that, the closer we will edge to this world they are building.
Whitney Webb's exploration of money and investment provides a critical perspective on the workings of the global financial system. She challenges the notion that current financial practices are inherently beneficial, arguing instead that they often perpetuate inequality and concentrate power in the hands of a few.
This is an effort by the same architects of even those instances in Ecuador and El Salvador to essentially foist the same thing on Latin America, but under a more, it doesn't seem like overt dollarization when it's stablecoins that aren't directly connected to the U.S. government, but they are connected directly to the U.S. Treasury system, for example. And then we also have some of these companies that Zappo are connected to, for example, that are also backed by this Endeavor company that is the focus of this piece, like Satellogic, which was also a key focus of our previous article, Debt from Above. And if you look at the board on Satellogic, you have the former head of the Treasury Department, Steve Mnuchin. You have Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the main, people involved in the Treasury system, right? And then you have someone from the Rohatyn Group, and the Rohatyn Group is named for Nick Rohatyn, who basically led the Latin American debt policies of JP Morgan throughout the 1980s, netting the bank an insane amount of money and really aggravating the Latin American debt crisis as we know it today. So why are all those people on the board of the satellite company, for example? And why do these people pop up at Zappo? Why are these people that also are, involved in stablecoins like PayPal, for example, with PYUSD, why are they all over Endeavor, the PayPal mafia? I think it's so much that it's very hard to ignore and write it off as a coincidence. I see Elon Musk as a person who has like a very specific persona he wants to project to the public, and then there's business Musk, right?
Whitney Webb critically examines Elon Musk's dominance in the tech industry, highlighting his significant impact on several sectors.
I don't want you to necessarily take my opinion or take, what I write about it at just face value and just like believe me, and like, no, believe the source material because it matters and I'm not like making this up.
However, Webb raises concerns about the concentration of power and influence that comes with Musk's growing empire.
Are you aware that bankers lie and engage in illegal activity to expand their money and power, right? Are you aware that those same bankers, or CEOs or whoever, are the bulk of donations to politicians?
Martin Luther King Jr. was a pivotal figure in the American civil rights movement. King's efforts were crucial in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
According to a case that was won by Martin Luther King Jr.'s family in the late 90s, Hoover's FBI was responsible for killing Martin Luther King Jr. There was a civil trial that was brought by King's own family, and they said, and the result of that was, it was the FBI. If nothing happened to them then, what do you think's going on now? My problem is that I feel like, thinking about like my own family, for example, and how they like view my work, or my grandparents, people like that, the way they were told things worked is not the way things were really working then. And a lot of the American public, in my opinion, has sort of been fed this fairy tale that the government is your friend, the government's here to help. But essentially, if you look at the history, the government's the mob.
Look at a human life. You come out of the womb and you're immediately influenced in your perceptions by your parents who've been through the process you're about to go through. Very soon, ludicrously soon, after entering this world, you find yourself sitting at a desk with an authority figure now telling you what is, what isn't, what's right, what's wrong, what's credible, what's not credible, when you can go to the toilet, when you can eat, when you can talk. And this goes on through your formative years, where the system's version of everything, what I call the postage stamp consensus, because it's so narrow, is downloaded into people. And then they go off into the institutions, they become journalists, they become scientists, they become doctors, they become politicians, they become CEOs or whatever. And they take with them that core version of normal they've been, and limitation possibility, that they have been downloading all their lives. And then the people in these institutions then confirm to each other that this norm is normal. So a journalist who's doing a story about, say, a health situation won't go to an alternative practitioner who may have had great success in it. He'll go to a doctor who'll give him postage stamp normal.
Obviously, there's going to be people, who are resistant to seeing things for the way they are because, some people just, for whatever reason, feel too uncomfortable engaging with reality sometimes. They don't want to face the fact that the government and corporations are like extremely doing insane illegal stuff that's killing people or stealing insane amounts of money from people and ruining people's lives because they're like, well, I can't do anything to change that. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but some people interpret it that way and they're like, I'm better off not engaging with this, and they prefer to stick their head in the sand, so to speak. So, for example, Elon Musk, a lot of people maybe forget, he's a big military contractor. And also, the Space Force, that's also an intelligence agency. So he's technically a military and intelligence contractor. In order to keep your contracting business with those things, there's certain rules you have to play by, and certain things, I would assume, you can and can't say, or you'll lose those lucrative contracts. And if you look at someone like Elon Musk and his business history, a lot of his companies would not have been successful without significant subsidies from the government. So, I feel like in order to get those deals, there's certain rules you have to abide by to an extent, at least when it comes to your business decisions and certain things, right? So maybe he wants to project, this persona of like, I'm one of the bros, I'm one of the guys, I believe in free speech and all of this. And certainly when he bought Twitter, that's what he said, but then it became, oh yeah, free speech, but not freedom of reach. And now it's sort of changing again with the appointment of this new CEO. And again, I don't really have any high hopes, and I didn't necessarily when Musk bought Twitter, just because I tend to be kind of skeptical, and I guess you could probably say cynical about these types of people. And, I personally, just from my own, experience with Epstein research, I have found Musk not to be very upfront about some of those connections there. So, for example, he'll be like, a lot of people like to bring up the picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell from 2014. He'll say he was photobombed and all of this. But, he won't bring up the fact, well, at least reporters seem to have forgotten, that Kimball Musk, his brother, who's on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, was introduced to a member of Epstein's entourage who had dated Epstein and lived at the apartments on 301 66th Street East, where all these traffic girls lived. A girl from there starts dating Kimball Musk, and somehow Epstein is allegedly granted access to SpaceX facilities and tours, and then is allegedly advising Tesla, according to the New York Times reporter James Stewart, who was told by someone else that Epstein was advising Tesla, and then goes before Epstein's 2019 arrest and most of his public infamy, goes and asks him about if the rumors were true, and Epstein says yes. And this is during a time when Musk is saying he's trying to secure capital to take Tesla private, I believe, and this was allegedly involving one of the Saudi wealth funds of the Saudi government. And at that time, Epstein was a very, very close advisor to Mohammed bin Salman, who had recently come to power. And if you remember back to when the Epstein story the scandal sort of broke in 2019, it wasn't just talking about his townhouse having all these pictures of him and Clinton. There were a lot. Elon Musk you have to look at the actions of Musk and then what he says. And not enough people do that, whether it's for Musk or really anyone. You have to look at people's actions, not just what they say, because someone can say all the right things and then, be totally fucking you behind your back. And if you're just going to take what they're telling you and the excuses and whatever, you'll never figure out what's actually going on. And I think that's fair for Elon Musk as well. Did he buy Twitter to save free speech, or did he buy Twitter to have a massive data to train AI on and to train all other sorts of products he has on? Or did he make it like he's openly admitted, did he buy it so he can turn Twitter, now X, into X the everything app that doesn't just become, isn't just social media. It becomes half of the financial system and becomes American WeChat. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, but is he the richest man in the world just because of his own entrepreneurial whatever? Or is it because his companies were held up by government subsidies that allowed him to become rich, and he's the richest man in the world because he worked with the state? Because, corporate media, right? Mainstream media, whatever, they don't really supply their sources a lot of the time for certain things, or they cite, a national security official and don't challenge what they have to say at all, or like add any important historical context about how maybe that official got caught lying during the Iraq War, for example, or all sorts of kind of stuff like that. So I try and add that kind of context. And frankly, though, there's like a lot of stories that just don't get covered either by mainstream media or even independent media. So much of independent media today is focused on like complaining about mainstream media coverage and not necessarily reporting on original stuff, which I think is actually kind of a big problem, because I think at this point we all know that mainstream media sucks, right? So there's definitely a need to like try and find the stories that aren't being covered, because there's, a lot of stuff, I think even too intentionally, like some of the tactics of mainstream media and the people that control them is to put out a story that's like intentionally annoying and outrageous so that everyone focuses on that and doesn't focus on other stuff in the news cycle, and other important stuff that is happening, slips through the cracks.
That there is a plan to make Orwell's 1984 reality. We're seeing this, of course, with more and more control of people's privacy and the constant gathering of fine, detailed data of people's lives. But the key thing is this. What directs people's lives? What directs their opinions? What directs their behavior? Their perceptions. Their perceptions of themselves, their perceptions of the world, their perceptions of world events.
The way they're sold those events.
Yeah. Now, this is the point. Where do we get those perceptions from? We get them from information received. It might be a personal experience information, or it might be the 10 o'clock news, or it might be the Daily Mail, or something on Facebook. The point is, if you control the information that people receive, then you will, to a vast extent, dictate their perceptions.
So think about what happened during COVID, and there were all these signals sent by powerful people that something greater than COVID would soon be upon us, whatever that is. So whether it's a giant war, another world war of that sorts, or, something else, COVID 2.0, what we saw during COVID, insane issues with inflation that persist, right? And insane supply chain issues. It's probably a good idea to have a supply of stuff you need to survive in your house. For X number of days, weeks, months, whatever. That's different for every person, but it's definitely not, it's definitely not a bad idea. And I don't think it's a tinfoil hat thing to say like, oh, I'd like to be able to feed my family if they close all the grocery store. We sort of saw with COVID, like how insane it was. I live in Chile and in South America. And there, when COVID started, there was some insane stuff there where you had to like show papers to get into grocery stores and stuff for a time. Like that could come back, it's not as crazy now as it might have been like 4 or 5 years ago to talk about that stuff. And there's nothing wrong with being prepared. There's probably something more wrong with being not prepared at all. But, a lot of times government incompetence is the excuse. So, I mean, just talking about like financial policy and stuff. I mean, I think it's easier to pick apart in those cases because you can see the obvious who benefits and who doesn't sometimes more easily. And they'll sort of be oh, well, we just, when the Fed printed a bunch of money during COVID and gave it to BlackRock to manage, was that incompetence? Especially when BlackRock wrote a plan at the end of 2019 of the monetary policy that the Fed followed exactly when COVID happened about what the Fed would need to do during an unforeseen crisis. I mean, it's just was that incompetence or is that corruption? And so, I mean, a lot of times they try and absolve themselves of when they sort of get caught or start to get caught for something corrupt, they'll be oh, don't look any further. We're just really stupid.
Now, I've just come back literally a few days ago from America. I've been filming there, and particularly Silicon Valley. I call it the Devil's Playground. If you now look at that, what is, when you visit it, a very small area of America, never mind the world, you've got companies that Facebook, Google, etc., that are increasingly, dominating the gathering of data of people's lives, B, because of the way they have so impacted upon the channels of communication, they dictate to such an increasing extent what people see and what people don't see.
They're trying to put AI in charge of the internet, and not just in charge of censoring what's on the internet, but also having AI make the lion's share of online content. So supposedly by 2025, generative AI like ChatGPT is going to produce 96 or something % of everything you read online, which means their mainstream media journalists are going to be completely replaced by them. I think there have been some magazines that have been caught using ChatGPT to write their stories already. I think Sports Illustrated was one. But
wow.
only going to get crazier. And so when you have AI both producing and then curating, i.e. censoring, everything, then AI dominates the information environment, and whoever programs AI and stipulates what information is okay and who isn't has unprecedented control. And when you consider that most people today get their information from online or, digital sources, that's unprecedented control of what people, not just how the information that people read and receive, but also, I mean, you're manipulating how people perceive reality. And that obviously translates into how people behave. And actually, Henry Kissinger, who I'm sure died recently, and the guy that he named as his heir, which is Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, wrote a book on AI explicitly about that, and how AI is basically going to control how we perceive reality by taking control of online content in its entirety. And that us becoming increasingly dependent on AI for everything is going to cognitively diminish people so that we won't be able to perceive reality or make sense of anything without AI doing it for us.
Facebook has had to say, actually, we're not doing it on purpose, or it's just for advertising. They are actually listening to conversations. Obviously, you've not got a human being sitting there, although if they're targeting someone, it's a human being. But the general population, it's algorithms. We're talking AI now. I mean, the possibilities of human manipulation of communication and the gathering of data now are limitless increasingly.
I mean, I think the whole idea of getting a lot of people to use ChatGPT and all of this stuff is to lead us down this path that Kissinger and Schmidt, among others, sort of are charting out for humanity, where if you, it's pretty much common sense though. If you develop a skill and then don't do it for 10 or 15 years, for example, you kind of forget how to do it, right? Or even, I graduated from university a little more than 10 years ago. How well do I recall the stuff that I took in university? Not great, right? So there's this whole idea of if you don't use it, you lose it. So if people are depending on AI to tell them where to turn when they're driving their car, and no one uses actual maps anymore. I mean, I understand that it's convenient, right? And I'm not saying we need to go back to the 90s, but right. But it becomes after a while a slippery slope where people are just having the computer tell them everything to do. Every step of their lives ends up becoming micromanaged to an extent. And the idea is that AI, through all the data that it absorbs about us, knows so much about us. Some of these people say it knows us better than we even know ourselves. There's that allows for an unprecedented degree of manipulation. And the problem is that the people producing and programming AI and ultimately controlling AI and what it can do not have our best interests at heart. And it is not a good idea to basically hand them our brains in a bag. Who owns AI, right? It's pretty much Silicon Valley companies. So like even OpenAI, Sam Altman's thing, that's essentially like owned by Microsoft, right? And so you have what? Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, all of these companies essentially owning like almost everything. And all of those companies are contractors for the military and intelligence, right? Guess throw Palantir in the mix too. And when you consider something like Palantir, they profile people. They suck up all of your data and then they profile you. And Palantir can profile like whether or not they deem you subversive or not. And what happens when AI, gets access of that and gets put in control of things like humanitarian aid, like they're talking about doing, or in charge of, the government itself, which is also talked about in the Schmidt-Kissinger book. It gets complicated. So, a lot of people have been talking about the coming sort of like social credit paradigm, for example. So what happens if there's a big crisis, your country is like a war zone or the economy collapses and you're dependent on humanitarian aid or some sort of aid from the government or some other group and there isn't enough for everyone, right? And so they decide, oh, well, it's fairer to put super intelligent AI in charge of it. And then that AI is like, oh, well, this person's been very compliant and hasn't committed all of these thought crimes, but not you. Who is it going to decide to give the food rations to and stuff like that? That's the risk of a lot of this stuff when it gets put in charge of too many systems. And then there's like a whole other side to it when you're dealing with stuff like AI weaponry, which we're seeing being used right now in the Israel-Gaza conflict to a significant degree, where they're deciding assassination targets, suppose people that they're deeming to be Hamas affiliated, which no one knows exactly how they're determining that. I mean, it could be someone who is a second cousin of someone in Hamas or something. We don't really know because there's no transparency. But obviously, the fact that they've gone from before this AI algorithm to identifying something like 15 to 20 targets a day to identifying hundreds of targets a day, something's going on.
Nature of the AI that's running things concentrates that power in such a small area and such a small number of hands. And if you want to have control by the few of the vast number, you have to centralize power. And that's what is happening in Silicon Valley on a scale that beggars belief.
And then there's another issue of whether AI is actually accurate or not. So, they'll say, like with facial recognition, I think there was a report a few years ago in the UK that a lot of the facial recognition stuff that the Met Police and other law enforcement groups are using are insanely inaccurate, but they want to continue using it and like deepen its involvement in identifying people, whether it's like at live events and all sorts of stuff. And I mean, it was insanely inaccurate. I mean, I can't remember the exact amount, but it was like under 50% accurate. So like flipping a coin is more accurate in that case. And what happens when AI algorithms that choose who lives and who dies, are put in charge of stuff and they're like 70% accurate or less? Because, I mean, the government's really corrupt with contractors. Like they don't always pick the best contractor for the job. So someone has connections that gets their AI in charge and they oversell their AI and say it's 90% 95% accurate, but it's not audited by an independent company, right? And so it's actually like in reality 65% accurate or something. And you're putting it in charge of like stuff that has a major effect on people's lives. That kind of stuff is happening. And I'm talking about stuff that hasn't necessarily quite happened yet, but we're headed there.
When the internet started, and which came out of an organization called DARPA, by the way, which is the technological development arm of the Pentagon, it was sold as the free flow of information. You could post all kinds of opinions. Now, if that didn't start like that, and right from the start is you can't say that, you can't do that, then it wouldn't have got this massive control and influence on the communications that go on between people. So you start with what people want. And then, especially more recently, and faster, you start doing, especially when you enter the realm of semi-monopoly, you start taking away the freedom of the free flow of information. So people now are having YouTube channels just deleted. No explanation, just deleted. On a big scale when they're challenging the official narrative.
It's going to become very different for a lot of different reasons. So I guess the risk with using like ChatGPT or generative AI, for example, is like if you use it too much that like you can't write without it, right? That's like the stuff people need to try and manage, I think. And as far as, what happens when all the content becomes ChatGPT, essentially, right? I mean, it's not really going to be very useful to people, but there's a lot of people that aren't really going to be able to notice so much the difference because it's like legible English and it kind of makes sense and, but it's not going to be like human thought anymore. Though there was a problem identified, I think, several months ago that once, these AI algorithms start training off of data that humans didn't produce, and it's training off of data or like content that it produced itself or another generative AI produced, its output becomes like gobbledygook, nonsensical stuff. So, I mean, it might just break itself. We'll see what happens, or if they're able to, I guess, remedy that. But regardless of that, the internet is going to change a lot. And this is a very like separate thing than what we've been talking about so far. But there's a deliberate push to regulate the internet. Obviously, there is some truth to the fact that it does make certain things more convenient. It does technically free up certain people's jobs so they can have more time to do other stuff. Yeah. The problem is literally the worst people in the world are in charge of it. And they want to use it to make everyone basically a complete idiot that's super easily manipulated and controllable. And that is what needs to be resisted. So, if someone wants to make like an open source AI that, I don't know, does some stuff, I mean, I'm not going to be like, no, don't do that. But, I think it's very important now more than ever to divest as much as possible from big tech, Google and Oracle and, all these other companies, Amazon, what have you, because they have too much power. The people in charge have obvious problematic agendas. And they basically, at least in the US, they own the government.